I've done it 1,000 times, and it works. But Roberta said, promise me you'll never say that in public. People will think you're crazy. I've even found you can do it in a slab inside, but it does work. And it was a geologist, a petroleum geologist, showed me that. And he said, promise you won't tell anybody who told you this. But to try it sometime, it works. You have to hold them real loosely. But it probably has something to do with galvanic currents or something far beyond my understanding. But if you ever don't have any other way to find a water line, it doesn't work with an empty pipe. But if you've got water flowing through a pipe, seriously, you can do that, and it'll cross. Yes, sir.
Bob, for a number of years I worked for an oil and gas exploration company up in the Anadarko Basin, up Oklahoma, Texas Panhandle. And when we'd be drilling an oil well out a long way from water, it had to have water, so we'd drill a well. And the manager of the site, he would go out with, he had 2 brass rods, and he'd just walk through the field as close to the side as possible. He had 100%. He said, drill the water well here.
Yep.
It's about 400 feet to the...
I've seen water witchers work, and some of them use a crystal, some of them use the rods, and John Schwope up in Bernie is as good at water witching as anybody I've ever known. But this doesn't require that degree of whatever magic it is, but and I can tell you it works for left-handed people as well as right-handed people. But just hold those rods real loosely, and you'll be amazed how easily you can find a water line. Okay, enough for finding water lines, but that's a good question. How do you know where it is? Get Saws or whoever to come and look as best they can. So the first thing we're going to do is anything that involves digging a trench. And like we talked last week, it's really important that you have that sprinkler system adjusted so that it's going to water your new beds properly and so that you can zone it differently. Your beds that you're going to put all these drought-tolerant plants in are not going to need water nearly as often as your grass is. So you need to have your system adjusted, whether it means putting in new heads or whether it means changing existing heads from 360 to 180 or vice versa or whatever else. So any digging that needs to take place happens first. Next thing that happens is any hardscape materials. Whether it's putting down simply an area of decomposed granite that we're going to put a swing or a bird bath or something like that. And by the way, if you haven't looked, there are some incredible and not real expensive metal swings out there. And I don't know about y'all, but I get real tired of refrigerated air inside the house. In your new landscape, consider an outdoor seating area and with a swing, with some Adirondack chairs or something like that. I just think you'll find that you enjoy being outside a whole lot more. But the next thing that goes in is your hardscape, whether it's a wooden deck, whether it's a flagstone deck or walkways, whether it's brick, whether it's, again, simply something like decayed granite. And by the way, if you want to make a hard surface with this, it needs to be about 3 inches thick. If you want a really tough, hard surface, that walkway is more like about 2 inches. But you walk on that, that's just as easy to walk on as concrete is. But it's a great thing. But anyway, those are the next things that go into your new landscape. Okay, then we're down to the plant material. What do we plant first? Well, the first thing you plant, and we're going to come back in just a second and talk about how to plant, but the first thing you're going to plant is your trees, because they are the slowest to develop. Second thing you're going to plant are your accent plants in the way of shrubs. Third thing you're going to plant is your, what I would call your general shrubbery and color and things like that. Then you're going to plant, in no particular order, your perennials, your ground covers, and your annuals. So, how do we go about planting these plants that we're going to put into the new landscape? Well, first thing you do, obviously, is dig a hole, but don't dig a round hole. I mean, these plants are in a nice round pot. Worst thing you can do is dig a round hole, because the root system on that plant, if you put it, and I don't know, maybe some of y'all live in the southeast side or somewhere that you have nice deep soil. Most of us live where we have very little soil or very lousy soil if we have it. You dig a round hole, you put this round root ball in there, and the roots are going to want to do this. They're never going to want to go outside the hole. Dig a square hole or a rectangular hole, or if you prefer an angular hole. You want some nice square edges in that hole. And then what happens? A root hits that corner, it takes off into the surrounding soil. have a round surface, it'll just keep following that round surface like that, and you'll end up with big problems. So, sounds really simple, but one of the most important things you do is digging square holes rather than digging round holes.
Can you just tell us to put a round peg in a square hole?
No, you're putting, yeah, that's exactly right. In landscaping, you can put a round peg in a square hole, and it works very well, and you should do it that way. Second thing is, a lot of people want to dig a really big hole, put a lot of really good soil in there to plant the plant. Wrong. Do not dig the hole any deeper than the root ball of the plant. You can dig it wider if you like. You can make that square as big as you want, but don't dig the hole any deeper. The reason for that is one of the worst problems that we face with plants is plants being buried too deeply. And if you look at the physical structure of the trunk of a tree or the stem of a plant, it's different above ground level and below ground level. Below ground level, that underneath that bark, so to speak, it's filled with what we call lignins and pectins, and think of them as waterproofing materials. The roots and the portion of a tree that is, or a plant or anything that's below the surface of the ground is more or less waterproof, so it doesn't hurt if it stays constantly wet. The part of the tree that's above the ground does not have that. And there are basically 3 layers to a tree trunk or the trunk of a woody shrub. The center portion is what we call the xylem. That's the tissue that takes water from the roots up to the top of the tree. The next layer out is what we call the cambium layer. This is our meristematic tissue that's making new cells all the time. It's making new xylem cells to the inside, and then to the outside, it's making what we call phloem, P-H-L-O-E-M, phloem cells. You're not going to have a test on Botany 1, but you need to understand the principle here. The phloem cells are what are just below the bark, and those are the cells that carry the nutrients from the leaves down to the root system of the plant. Remember that root system has no chlorophyll. It can't make any sugars, can't make any energy on its own. So it has to rely on the green part of the plant up above ground to make the nutrients that it sends down that keeps the root system alive. Okay, so what happens if we go above the normal area that's waterproofed and we start filling wet soil around it? Well, first thing happens is the bark starts to rot. Next thing happens is the phloem layer starts to rot, and then the cambium underneath. The phloem is a very thin layer. Xylem can be huge. But what happens when that phloem layer rots? Okay, we've cut off the nutrient supply to the roots. The roots have some stored nutrient, and they start going through that. And once they've used up their nutrient, the roots die, and just overnight, well, certainly within a week or so, you can see a huge tree suddenly just fold up and die. It's kind of like a Christmas tree. You go out and stick it down in the ground, it's going to look fine for a few days, and then it's just going to crater on you. And that's what will happen with trees and shrubs and any woody plant. If you pile soil up around the trunk, or if you bury the plant too deeply and wet soil fills in around the trunk of the plant will die sooner or later. In case of a tree, it may take years. In case of other things, it may take days. But I've seen trees. I looked at a big oak tree down in Alamo Heights one time that had about this much soil filled in around it. That tree was dead as a doornail. And the soil had been filled in about 10 years ago. We pulled the soil back, and you can see where it just rotted everywhere that the wet stuff was up against the trunk. Now, when we have weather that's as dry as it is right now, you may get away with it for years, but you simply cannot have moist soil or anything piled around the trunk of a tree. How does that relate to planting it? Well, you've dug your nice big hole, you put your nice soil mix in the bottom of the hole, all nice and loose and fluffy and everything to make the tree happy, right? That tree is going to sink over time. And when that tree sinks, things are going to fill in around it, and you're going to end up with this rotting problem. Again, people sometimes want to create a raised bed around trees, usually around existing trees. You can do that, but if you fill soil all the way up to the tree trunk, ultimately you will kill the tree. So what do? You create a second layer around the inside. You make a donut, in effect. You have an inner ring and an outer ring. You can do that, and you can fill as much as you like. You're not going to cover that much of the tree's root system, but as long as you've kept that trunk dry and exposed to the air, no problem. But you build that flower bed around the tree and fill it with soil, sooner or later that tree will die. So, no raised beds without that inner ring, and